welcome back to my channel. This week I'm making one of my Disney bounds for my upcoming Disneyland trip, and the first Disney bound I've decided to make is something based on Snow White. She is one of my favourite princesses after all, and because Disneyland is the original theme park, it only made sense to me to pay homage to the original Disney princess herself. So let's get started. For the pattern I'm using this 1950s reproduction pattern from Butterick B6870. For the collar, I'm using some leftover white linen from my Mirabelle costume. For the bodice of the dress, I'm using this royal blue 100% cotton. And for the skirt of the dress, I'm using this yellow 100% cotton that has a cute flower pattern embroidered into it. For the other bits and bobs, I have these cute apple buttons, a red velvet ribbon, and a blue invisible zip. Now, let's get started. First, I cut the bodice pieces out of the blue. Then the collar pieces out of the white, and then the skirt pieces from the yellow. Next I cut out the bodice facing pieces out of some black iron-on interfacing, and the collar pieces out of some white iron-on interfacing. Then I applied the interfacing to the corresponding pieces. And for the final step of preparing all the pieces before they get sewn together, I transfer any of the notches and markings onto all of the pattern pieces. Once that's all done, I then sew the darts together in the bodice pieces. Next, I sew the centre back panels together. Then I sew the front pieces to the back at the shoulder seams. Next I sew the side seams together fully on one side, and then just this tiny little section on the other side because I have to leave room for the zipper. Then I test the fit on my mannequin to see if I'm happy with it. And I am, so I move on to making the collar. First I sew these two pieces together along this line here, and repeating with the interface side. Next I sew the uninterfaced and interface pieces together along this line here. To make the corners of the collars nice and crisp when I turn them out, I trim back excess fabric in the corners. I then also trim away excess fabric in the seam to help it lay nice and flat. Then it's time to attach the collar pieces to the bodice, so I just put them here and sew along the neckline like this. With the collar pieces attached, it's time to hide the seam by adding a facing. To start, I sew these pieces together here, and then the front pieces get attached here at the shoulder seam. With the facing piece created, it is then time to add it along the neckline and the centre front of the bodice. Happy with how the bodice is turning out, I then move on to the skirt. Taking the skirt pieces I cut out earlier, I sew them together down the side seam like so. And then I begin my least favourite part of any project, which is pleating. After pinning all of the pleats in place, I then do a long basting stitch on the machine to help hold them in place while I construct the rest of the skirt. I also do a basting stitch along the top edge as well to really help hold them in place. I then repeat the sewing, pleating and basting process for the back panels of the skirt as well. With the front and back panels done, I can now sew them together at the side seams, remembering to leave a gap at the top of one of the side seams so that I can put the zipper in later. Before attaching the skirt to the bodice, I first make sure on the mannequin that all of the pleats line up with all of the darts and side seams, etc. that they're meant to. And they do! With the skirt just about done, I can now finish the bodice, which basically means putting the buttons on. Using a chalk pen, I draw in the guide for the buttonholes and the buttons. And for the buttons, I found these really cute apple buttons which I thought were entirely appropriate for a Snow White Disneybound. I then create the holes for the button using the buttonhole setting on my machine. And using the button setting on my machine, I sew the buttons on too. Finally, I open up the buttonholes and voila, all of the buttons are done. Which means I can now sew the skirt to the top. And just like that, this dress is almost done. Alright, so at this point the dress is pretty much done. All I have left to do on it now is to sew a zipper into the side here, sew this bow on the back there and then trim the tails. I need to hem the bottom of the skirt so that it's in line with the petticoat that's underneath, which means I'm having to take off about 6 inches or so off the bottom. So let's get that done and then it's 100% finished, and this only took me a couple of hours, so that's great. It's amazing how quickly I can get a dress done when I don't have to alter anything on it. So first I add that invisible zipper into the side seam. Then I take about 7 inches off the bottom of the skirt so that I can hem it. With all the excess fabric cut off, I then mark in the seam allowance of the hem. I fold it over and then iron it so that it's easier to sew it in place. And with the hemming of the skirt done, the dress is finally finished. Let me show you it. And there you have it. That is how I made my Snow White vintage inspired Disneybound. I'm pretty stoked with how this one turned out. It is cute, it's instantly recognizable as who it is, and it's Snow White approved, guys. She called me her princess all day and it was really cute. You know, you saw in the video me and her skipping through Fantasyland together. She actually walked me from one side of Fantasyland to the other to the wishing well, and we made a wish together, and she just couldn't get over my outfit the whole time. So it was worth it for that moment alone. Construction wise, cannot fault it. It's good. The pattern was great. It came together in a few hours. So overall, would use this pattern again. Wouldn't make this particular outfit again, just because it's not my personal style. It was really cool to do as a Disneybound, but the colours are too bright and too fun for what I would wear every day. As you can see, I'm limited to blacks and purples mostly. The only thing I would do differently making it again, pockets. I just didn't have enough time to do it this time, or else I would have added them in. I was just in a time crunch, so they got neglected, but yeah, would make again, would add pockets. If you like this video, maybe consider leaving a like down below. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments. And if you really liked it, maybe even consider subscribing. I do a lot of sewing, crafting, and fun related things here on this channel, and I usually try and upload every week or so. With all that being said, I'll see you guys next week. Goodbye! All I have left to do on it now is to sew it.